The following is a presentation of Molestar Communications.
Russo centered it right in front. Sawchuk made a stop on Belleville from point-blank range.
Almost stopping it at the point. Provo working in for Montreal over to Belleville. He scores! Belleville!
Harvey behind the net to Sanderson. Harvey scores in the Boston Bruins.
Oilers win the draw. Kevin Lowe off the glass, kept in by Duchesne. A rolling puck. Taylor Gretzky scores!
Watch it, lead pass, passing on a breakaway. Going in, scoring!
Back come the Canadians. Geoffrion with one man back. Geoffrion shoots. He scores! Geoffrion. Finds the corner. Shot! Rebound! Score!
Morrill is tied up behind the net. Here's Richard going in on goal. He shoots, he scores! Richard!
For over a century, hockey has been producing heroes. The sport has featured stars whose blend of ambition and ability has enabled them to skate past their peers to a very special place reserved for only the very best on ice. It's the story of these players which has inspired this presentation. Welcome to hockey's all-time All-Stars. I'm Ron McLean. We have tested some of the most fertile and credible minds in the business and prepared a compilation of what we believe to be the very best this sport has offered. In short, what we've set out to do is to pick out the top 6 players by position in each of hockey's 3 major eras. The first being the period from 1917, the NHL's inaugural season, through until 1943, when the game changed rather dramatically because of the introduction of the center red line. The second period is from 1944 through until the NHL's watershed expansion in 1967, when the league went from 6 to 12 teams. And the final period will, of course, be from 1967 through until the present. Now, obviously, our selections are going to provoke debate, but it's our sincere hope that through these ideas and by acknowledging the stars and the players whom they played with and against, that you too will come to appreciate the tremendous contributions these men have made to their sport. So let's begin with hockey's roots and to look at those who laid the foundation for others to achieve fame at their game. In the late 19th century, Canada was forming its roots as a nation. Its boundaries growing, the country continually searched for an identity. Ice hockey became a part of that. Long before arenas were built, outdoor shinny was the credo. Equipment came in the form of regular day clothing augmented with baseball paraphernalia. The popularity grew in such a manner that by 1890 tournaments were being scheduled. One man who made more than a mere notation of that interest was Canada's Governor-General, Lord Stanley of Preston. In 1893, he donated a cup in his name to be given to the top amateur club in Canada, its first holder, the Montreal Amateur Athletic Association. They were followed in succeeding years by winners in a challenge format. The most famous of those challenges came from Dawson City in 1905, as the champion Ottawa Silver 7 was opposed by the Klondikers. That team ventured 4,000 miles, but experienced 9-2 and 23-2 beatings. In those contests, Rover Frank McGee, a one-eyed legend, popped in 15 goals. McGee was just one of a group of exceptional pioneers that put hockey on the sporting map. Others included the legendary Cyclone Taylor, a character of the first order. His career featured 194 goals in 186 games, one he claims he scored skating backwards. In 1960, he turned the sod for the opening of the Hockey Hall of Fame. Moose Johnson, he possessed the longest reach in hockey. Sprague Cleghorn was a roughhouse type who terrorized opponents. Jack Laviolette was hockey's initial speed merchant. Kobe Baker, the sport's first U.S.-born star. Frank Nyber is viewed by many as the greatest center of the pre-NHL era, while Newsy Lalonde was hockey's perennial scoring machine. The game's consistent rise in popularity later saw cup winners from Quebec. The Bulldogs featured a youngster named Joe Malone, and Vancouver, where where Cyclone Taylor led the Millionaires. Many of hockey's future minds were given seed here. The Patricks, Lester and Frank, Art Ross, and Jack Adams. It was a vital time for the sport, and the clear cutting headed by the aforementioned personalities led the way for unprecedented growth. Growth which upon maturity would be known as the National Hockey League. A few fledgling pro leagues have been tried previously, but they met with limited success. Then in 1917, the year Canada introduced taxes, hockey introduced the NHL. And as North American sport and life in general moved toward a vibrant time, hockey rode that wave, fought through its infancy, and produced characters of timeless virtue. This group proved a handful for enemy shooters over their respective careers. Legends all, many other excellent netminders were left aside when we decided on this band of five. In 1910, the Montreal Canadiens introduced George Vezina to the National Hockey Association. Over the next 15 years, Vezina's excellence led him to legendary status. He participated on 2 Stanley Cup teams, notching a 3.45 goals against career average. Much of that in seasons where rules refrained from allowing goaltenders to drop to their knees. This Chicoutimi, Quebec native was an NHL Ironman until tuberculosis tragically ended his life in March of 1926. The name Cecil Thompson may not register when talking of the game's greats, but insert the nickname Tiny and recognition's immediate. The moniker was a bit misleading. Besides standing 5'10" and weighing 170 pounds, there were also these rather large contributions. A career 2.27 average, 4 Vezina trophies, and 4 All-Star berths. Thompson was a true Boston Bruin great. Ranked by many as the outstanding goaltender of his generation, Charlie Chuck Gardner's career and life ended at age 30. Despite his brief tenure in the NHL, nothing could diminish his excellence. In 7 seasons, his average was 2.13. He registered 42 shutouts, and he captured the Vezina twice. His life ended suddenly in 1935, but his legend did not. Many claimed that if completed, his career would be the one by which all goaltenders are measured. His nickname speaks volumes. Frank Brimsick was hockey's Mr. Zero. The Minnesota native was one of the first U.S.-born players to star in the NHL, and star he did. Replacing Boston's Tiny Thompson in 1938, Brimsick captured the Calder and Vezina trophies. Twice that season, he registered shutout strings of 3 games. An all-time Bruin great, he finished his career in Chicago in 1950, ending 13 years earmarked with success. He wasn't called Mr. Zero for nothing. Our vote as top netminder during hockey's initial period goes to George Hainsworth. His non-athletic looking appearance belied the fact that Hainsworth was in fact a great athlete. As a youth, he was a member of an Allen Cup team. As a pro, there was very little he did not accomplish. He began his career in Saskatoon in 1923. Later, he joined the Montreal Canadiens. In the 1928-29 season, he allowed an amazing 43 goals in 44 games. Registering 22 shutouts, he finished his career in Toronto in 1937 with an amazing 94 shutouts in 11 years. A true legend, and our choice as all-star goaltender. This period was tabbed the golden age of sport. Boxing's ring was ruled by the Manasseh Mauler, the great Jack Dempsey. Golf's Bobby Jones perfected his swing on the links, while baseball's dynamic duo held court in New York. Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig were the darlings of not only Yankee fans, but baseball fans in general. Like those legends, hockey's defensive stars were forging their own niche. Here's a group whose hockey commitment continued beyond their playing days. In the case of Shore and Clancy, a lifetime of devotion. Few competitors anywhere, anytime, has had as enriching a professional life as Clarence Hap Day. His NHL participation included stints as a coach, manager, and referee, but it was as a player he first gained notoriety. His outstanding work alongside King Clancy was a vital cog in propelling the Toronto Maple Leafs to their first Stanley Cup in 1932. A war veteran, his leadership was also memorable as he captained and coached the Leafs to 6 Stanley Cups. Colorful and carefree, Ching Johnson was one of a handful of New York Rangers that established the NHL in New York in the 1920s. He began his NHL career as a 28-year-old defenseman and finished up as a wily 46-year-old jack of all trades. His zesty physical approach earned him respect and several serious injuries, none of which could halt his aggressiveness nor his dash to the position of all-star. If hockey's reputation could ever be represented by a single individual, Francis Michael Clancy would be the ideal choice.
I remember one night we were playing out of Chicago. I was on one side of the rink, and they scored the winning goal, and they all disappeared down a hole down in the dressing room. And I got down there. Here was Clancy on the trunk. The season's all over, mind you. Stand on the trunk with nothing on at all. He said, "Those so-and-sos will never beat us again. Wait till we get at them again." Here it was, the whole summer we were getting ready, and he always could do that. He could always fire up his club.
A refreshing personality, Clancy was purchased for $35,000 by Toronto in 1930. He repaid Smythe by leading the Leafs to the 1932 NHL Championship. Later, as a referee, coach, and executive, he parlayed his love of life in hockey's best interest. A true character and legend, King Clancy. Now to the first of our all-star defensemen, 16-year veteran Earl Seibert. A player whose offensive abilities were both innovative and eye-opening. For 10 consecutive seasons, Seibert was an all-star, first with the Rangers, later with both Chicago and Detroit. While he was efficient with the puck, he was as renowned for his work without it. And he could be abrasive also. Underrated, his credentials are considerable and worthy of a place on our all-star team. Up next, a man with a laser temper and explosive talent. The combination made Eddie Shore almost untouchable. Shore broke into the NHL with Boston in 1926. For 13 years, he vigorously attacked opponents, earning him bloody rivals and grudging respect. He's the only defenseman to win the Hart Trophy 4 times. He was voted to all-star teams on 8 occasions, but it was his reputation as a no-nonsense competitor that was his legacy and left us little choice but to include him on any all-star aggregate we selected. Any team that desires a stake in a championship must pay attention to defense, but it's the sizzle that excites the fans. And the NHL smartly sold it to fans across North America in its formative years. In fact, it was its main selling point, enforced up front by some pretty aggressive salesmen. Our look at the forwards begins on the left side. Here's 5 dependable, if not spectacular players. Speed and skill in a small package. That was the trademark of one Oral Joliette. In the early 1920s, the Montreal Canadiens traded legend Musi Lalonde for Joliette. Later, he would live up to the expectations of that trade. A former football star, Joliette took his speed game to hockey, first in Western Canada and later with Montreal, where he put the polish on a legacy. In tandem with another Canadian star, Howie Morenz, Joliet played on 3 Stanley Cup teams, won the Hart Trophy, and contributed 270 career goals. David Sweeney Shriner was the model of consistency, leading by example with the Maple Leafs in Toronto and the Americans in New York. Born in Calgary, Shriner won the Calder Trophy in 1935. Conn Smythe realized his value and sent 5 players to New York in order to bring Shriner to Toronto. There he participated on 2 Cup winners while playing a vital role. 201 career goals, 2 All-Star nominations, 2 league scoring titles, and too many memories to recount. Versatile and physical, Babe Siebert excelled as both a forward and a defenseman in his NHL career. He finds his way onto our All-Star list as a left winger, a position he played with flair on the Montreal Maroons' famous S-line with Hooley Smith and Nell Stewart. Later, as a defenseman with the Rangers, his play so impressed that he was awarded the Hart Trophy in 1937. Toe Blake's abilities as a leader after his playing career are legendary, but his first impression was as a player. Blake's career initially began with the Montreal Maroons in 1934. The next year he moved cross town, and the Canadiens were the beneficiaries for the next 35 years. Blake's experience anchored the famed punchline. He captured the Hart Trophy and the scoring title in 1939, and his career featured 235 goals while playing on 2 Cup winners. Many great Portsiders graced hockey, but few were as blessed as Harvey Busher Jackson, our choice as the best left winger of his time. A graduate of the Toronto Marlies and a member of the illustrious Kid Line in Toronto, Jackson collected 241 goals in his career. The threesome were the cornerstone of some great Leaf teams that thrilled a nation. His off-ice demeanor left him in trouble with management, but he always will be remembered for his on-ice abilities. 5 All-Star berths and a flashy style that helped him carve a franchise in Toronto and a certain place on our all-time All-Star team. This group provided some of our most difficult choices in selecting All-Stars. For various reasons, each player provided ample evidence of his skills. In fact, Dit Clapper played less of his career up front than he did on defense, but his excellence at the right wing position put him squarely in the running for All-Star honors. Such was the depth of Leaf teams in the 1930s that when Charlie Conacher was injured, goals were his replacement in the person of Gordie Drillin. When 20 goals in a season was a real accomplishment, Drillin notched 155 in 7 seasons. He led the league in goals and points in 1937-38, and the Leafs in offense for much of the decade. Gordie Drillin was a sniper of the first magnitude. Hooley Smith's career as a player was filled with success. In 1924, he was a member of Canada's Olympic champions. He turned pro with Ottawa in 1927, and they promptly won the Stanley Cup. Later, he was dealt to the Maroons of Montreal, and would you believe, yet another Stanley Cup in 1935. 200 goals, 415 points, and magical success. Dit Clapper was the first player in NHL history to compete for 20 seasons. He was versatile, excelling at 2 different positions, 11 years on defense, 9 at right wing. 228 goals in his career, 41 of them in 44 games in 1929-30 for Boston. Playing your career, especially a long one for one team, is a rarity. Bill Cook did just that in New York. His first year, 1926, when he captured the NHL scoring title. For 12 seasons, Frank Boucher, Bill, and Bun Cook formed one of hockey's most dangerous trios. In his career, 223 goals and 16 more in the playoffs. Our selection as top right winger goes to Toronto's big trade, Charlie Conacher.
Charlie, it's conceded that you have the hardest shot of the National Hockey League. I think a lot of people would be very interested to know just how you hold your stick. How do you get them away so fast?
Well, I hold a stick just about the same as anyone else, Foster, but I think I snap it away with my wrist a little quicker.
All right, Dan, come on now. Come on.
A member of a famous Canadian athletic family, Conacher joined the Leafs from the Toronto Marlies in 1929. He became the rifleman on the Leafs kid line. He led the NHL in scoring in 1934 and 35. He was the league's top goal producer in 4 consecutive years. 5 times an All-Star, Conacher retired in 1941, considered one of the greatest right wingers in any era. These 5 will go down in hockey history as not only 5 of the best players to play at their position, but also 5 of the best players ever to have played the game. The Boston Bruins had plenty of weapons as they strode to prominence in the 1930s, none more lethal than the skills of Bill Cowley. His playmaking abilities were revered and feared by opponents. He played on 2 Stanley Cup winners and captured the 1941 scoring title. Lifetime 195 goals, 350 assists, testament to his gift of giving. Earlier, we featured his line mates. Now we get to the hub of the S-line, Nell Stewart, hockey's highest scoring machine in the first 30 years of the NHL. His nickname was Old Poison. He was the first player to score over 300 goals. He joined the Montreal Maroons in 1925, popping in 34 goals in his rookie year. He won the Hart Trophy twice and played on a Cup winner in 1926. Gentlemen like Frank Boucher come along once in a generation. A marvelous playmaker, Boucher laid claim to the Lady Byng Trophy 7 times in 8 years. He began his career in Ottawa in the early 20s, but soon he ventured to New York, where he joined the Cooks and 2 Cups. Later, he coached the Rangers to their last Cup victory in 1940. While Joe Malone played the majority of his career prior to the NHL's formation in 1917, his rare ability at marksmanship puts him solidly on our list. His career featured 280 goals, 44 of them in 20 games in 1917. He once popped 7 goals in a single game that same season. That's testament to the true dominance by a legend that helped lift the new league in its infancy. Howie Morenz had many accolades in his career, but perhaps the finest came in 1950 when he was voted hockey's greatest player of the half-century. He gets our nod as the top center in our initial phase. The Stratford Streak was one of his many nicknames. His game featured tremendous stick handling, blinding speed, and a snapping shot. He recorded 270 goals, was a 3-time winner of the Hart Trophy, and was a 3-time All-Star. He spent 11 years in Montreal, then returned following a pair of trades. Tragically, Moren's career and life ended when he died following complications from a broken leg suffered in a game at the Montreal Forum. In recapping our choices in the period following the NHL's inception, shutout king George Hainsworth is in goal. On defense, it's the reliability of Earl Seibert and the tenacious Eddie Shore. While up front, our line for all time, left to right, Harvey Jackson, Howie Morenz, and Charlie Conacher. Players who'd grown up watching the NHL serve its apprenticeship were now ready to take center stage. The league, a 6-team circuit which had been forged through the war, stood solidly in place and was ready to entertain the hopes and dreams of these players. We're going to begin our look at this era with 6 netminders who performed in sensational style as the last line of defense. In attempting to choose amongst this handful, arguments could begin in 5 directions. All anchored championship clubs. He joined Toronto at an age when many are considering retirement. Johnny Bower aged oh so well.
Over here to Hillman, his shot, Bower stopped that, another shot.
In 11 years, Bower's NHL total showed a 2.52 average and 4 Stanley Cups. Bower once remarked that as the competition got stiffer, he worked 3 times as hard. Johnny Bower is proof that hard work pays off. Ambidextrous and brilliant, Bill Durnan rates as one of hockey's true artists. He joined Montreal in 1944. The Vezina Trophy was his in 6 of the next 7 seasons. 6 first-team All-Star selections and a career average of .336. A few seasons after Durnan stepped aside, Jacques Plante stepped in. Here's a player that revolutionized his sport, chasing pucks and redefining the goalie's role in the game. His largest gift came in the late 1950s when he introduced the mask to the goaltender's armor. His career also included stops in New York, Boston, St. Louis, and Toronto. A 7-time All-Star, he earned 82 shutouts and a .337 average. Perhaps no goaltender in hockey's history put himself through so much, but provided so much, as did Glenn Henry Hall.
Here's Duff again, centering it right out in front. A shot. Hall is down, and he robs Russo.
Hall's infamous anxious stomach left him groggy at times, but it never affected his on-ice performance in 18 seasons. During one stretch, he played a remarkable 502 consecutive games. An 11-time All-Star, Detroit, Chicago, and St. Louis housed Hall's abilities, but it was the NHL that was graced by his play. Most seasons, games, shutouts, and most votes as our outstanding goaltender of this period, Terry Sawchuk. His career was highlighted by stops in Detroit, Boston, and Toronto, and by 103 shutouts. In the 1952 playoffs, Sawchuk almost single-handedly won the cup for Detroit. 8 games, 4 shutouts versus Montreal. In all, he played on 4 cup winners. To have never seen Terry Sawchuk is a crime, a statement echoed by the shooters he robbed so often.
Hellman shot it around to Harper. Russo centered it right in front. Sawchuk made a stop on Belleville from point-blank range.
The role of a defenseman began to change as the NHL evolved. Bigger and stronger offense began to play a larger role, but the role of leadership has never changed. These 5 are proof of that. A physical presence throughout his career, Emil Butch Bouchard's leadership was a key component in 4 cup victories in Montreal. He spent 8 years as the Canadiens' captain. His abrasive behavior, combined with his 185-pound frame, left opponents uneasy inside Montreal's blue line. He was uniquely effective in the playoffs, scoring big goals and providing stability. Like Bouchard, Tim Horton's physical status was intimidating. He joined Toronto in 1952. He was to play almost 18 seasons, 14 with the Maple Leafs, 1 each with New York, Pittsburgh, finishing with 2 in Buffalo. He garnered 6 All-Star nominations, was a member of 4 Stanley Cup teams, and was elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1977. The nickname Blackjack for defenseman Jack Stewart is a clear indication of the all-star punishment he inflicted during his dozen seasons in the NHL. His combination of raw physical power and defensive efficiency was dominating. He was a 5-time All-Star and played on 2 Cup winners in Detroit. Later, his career moved on to Chicago, where his intensity helped the Blackhawks. Now on to our choices as All-Star defensemen. First up, Leonard Red Kelly. His initial career stop was Detroit. There, he played a huge role in their success in the 1950s. His offensive punch from the defense made the Wings almost invincible. Later in the decade, he grew discontented and needing a new challenge, he found it in Toronto. Kelly turned into an all-star playmaker.
Going over the line with Ellis. Kelly shoots. Ellis shoots. He scores! Ellis got the rebound.
Arguably the greatest player at his position in hockey history, Doug Harvey steered the Canadiens to greatness during their glory years in the 50s and 60s. He captured the Norris Trophy 7 times and proudly recalled those years and times.
I think a lot of credit goes to Toll and the organization as a whole, but the big thing is the team togetherness and a team that doesn't want to lose and don't have fun after the game when they do lose. Well, they try harder, and I think that's the key.
Harvey's leadership was a constant. Key goals were a formality. His puck control and pace-setting style were uniquely Doug Harvey. To give you an idea of just how difficult it was to select forwards at their position for this era, here's a list of 4 players who didn't even make the list. Dave Keon, Ted Kennedy, Doug Bentley, and Elmer Locke. 4 outstanding forwards, all of whom arguably should have made our list, but then when you look at the players we've chosen, you'll see how tough the process was. So here's a look at the forwards from this era who made it, beginning on the port side. Here are 4 names that reek of offense. All 4 are Hall of Famers. We begin with Terrible Ted Lindsay. He joined the Detroit Red Wings in 1944. Quickly, he established himself as a tenacious, aggressive personality. A member of Detroit's fabled production line, Lindsay was a 9-time All-Star. In 17 seasons, he recorded 379 goals. Later, he was dealt to Chicago, but returned to Detroit in 1964, making a successful comeback with the Wings, providing ample evidence of his talent. Always aggressive, always around the net, Dickie Moore is greatly respected in hockey circles. The gritty Moore played even while hurt and put his team above his mighty personal totals.
The individual records are great, but it's the ultimate that counts, and that's the Stanley Cup.
A 2-time scoring champion, Moore's Montreal heroics were followed by comeback bids in both Toronto and St. Louis. Dickie Moore, always a winner. In 1958, the Toronto Maple Leafs introduced a strapping left winger to their offensive arsenal. Frank Mahovlich took the bit in his teeth and ran the distance in a classic career. The Big M was an enigma. It seemed people always expected more, but he provided plenty. The Calder Trophy in 1958, 48 goals in the 1960-61 season, 4 Stanley Cups while with Toronto. Few players excited like Frank Mahovlich. At exactly the same time, Bobby Hull powered his way onto the scene.
For Bobby Hull. Here's a shot. Score!
Power hockey. Hull perfected it. His style was smooth yet forceful. His skating style and blazing shot were lore. In 1966, he became the first player to pass the magic 50-goal mark. He is clearly our choice as all-star left winger. This period had players that are talked about in awe-like terms. Here are 4 of the reasons for that description. Competition among this group turned fierce for 2 decades. The New York Rangers had some pretty rough years in the late 50s and early 60s. One of the rare standouts was Andy Bathgate. His combination of skillful playmaking and shooting accuracy thrilled Madison Square Garden. Later in the 60s, Bathgate called Toronto home, calling it a career with 349 goals. If the flair and offensive starch of the Canadians in the late 50s is best embodied in any one player, it might be Bernie Geoffrion. He joined the Canadians in 1951 and immediately put his offensive game to work. His nickname, Boom Boom, best illustrates the power game he possessed. In 1961, he recorded a career-high 50 goals, ending his tenure with 393. A star of stars in a galaxy of greats, the Rocket. Maurice Richard is the player most responsible for Montreal's star-studded legacy. He possessed a fiery temper, a devotion to the game, and a purpose that was best exemplified in his steely eyes. He recorded 544 career goals, was a member of 8 Cup champions, and received All-Star recognition 14 times. For excellence, durability, and perseverance, there is no career in sports history to rival Gordie Howe's. His legend began in Detroit as the Red Wings were rising to prominence in the late 40s. Jack Adams put Howe together with Sid Abel and Ted Lindsay, and production was the result. The records he set are too numerous to mention. 801 goals and 26 seasons are 2 that stand out. 21 times in his career he was an All-Star, 12 on the first team. An old song justifies our selection as top right wing. A portion stated, Gordie Howe is the greatest of them all. The centers take center stage next. The first thing that strikes you about this handful is their take charge abilities. These gentlemen led by example. Max Bentley's stick-handling skill practically invented the phrase dipsy doodle. He began his career as a member of the Pony Line in Chicago, but in 1947, a trade to Toronto broke up his act with brother Doug. It did, however, give the two-time NHL scoring champion the chance to play on 3 Cup champions with the Maple Leafs. A perfect definition of hockey sense can be found looking at the bio of Stan Mikita. Mikita's early days on Chicago's Scooter Line featured goals and penalties, but he reformed his act, and by the end of his 20th season, he had recorded 4 scoring titles, 2 Hart trophies, and his famous number 21 was retired in the Chicago Stadium rafters. Henri Richard has his name on the Stanley Cup 11 times. Now that's success. Growing up, he watched brother Maurice carve out a career for all time. Soon, however, the Pocket Rocket had established himself as a clever, artful, unforgettable star with a flair for the dramatic.
Morrill is tied up behind the net. Here's Richard going in on goal. He shoots, he scores! Richard!
Schmidt's career is one the NHL can be proud of. His skill made Boston's Kraut line a machine. With 229 goals, he credits the lessons he was taught.
Being associated with such greats as Tiny Thompson in the nets, Eddie Shore on defense, Dick Clapper, who in my opinion was one of the greatest ever, not only on the ice but off the ice. So that was really a tremendous thrill for an 18-year-old coming in here and hearing about all these greats, and all of a sudden you being on the same ice surface as them.
Initiate a conversation on class in hockey, and Jean Beliveau is certain to be the subject. The Montreal Canadiens watched his elegant domination while Beliveau starred in Quebec City. Soon they had his name on a contract. He repaid them for that trust with a lifetime of devotion. The leadership and character he exhibited are a big portion of his legend. 507 goals, 2 Hart trophies, 10 championship clubs. The epitome of prestige in hockey. Beliveau heads up an impressive cast on this all-star club for the period ending at expansion. It's hard to find fault with this group. This is the Detroit Olympia, 1928. The Detroit Olympics at home to the Cleveland Barons. A look at the past that really foreshadowed the future of this great game. You know, as we began to collect ideas with respect to the most influential figures in hockey, a number of off-ice participants came to mind. So in this section, we'd like to draw attention to those whose accomplishments are reflected in the number of fans they brought to the game. As World War I was drawing to a close, the NHL was in its infancy. Hockey has always been fortunate to have had leaders off the ice to stabilize its roots. Early in its formation, things were no different. Lester Patrick was one of those. The New York Rangers were his baby, and he nursed it well. One of his disciples was Conn Smythe. He moved to Toronto, and during the Depression, supervised the building and growth of Maple Leaf Gardens of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Boston's architect was Art Ross. Detroit's was Jack Adams. In Montreal, a pair of hockey great names, Dick Irvin and Frank Selke. They built the Canadiens into a power that's never been rivaled in this sport. The leadership also came from the top. Frank Calder, Red Dutton, Clarence Campbell, and John Ziegler, 4 influential presidents. However, off the ice, the sport's most influential personality may well be embodied in a man and broadcasting legend.
Again, from coast to coast, it's Hockey Night in Canada. Brought to you by Molson.
Hello, Canada hockey fans. In the United States, Bill Hewitt from Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto.
Expansion in 1967 brought 6 new teams into the quest for the Stanley Cup. It also broadened the NHL's fan base from a core following in the northeast of North America to the entire continent as the LA Kings and Oakland Seals came aboard. Furthermore, it introduced us to a new and advanced style of offensive hockey that taxed many goaltenders. But here's a look at a half dozen who met the challenge and even in the wide-open modern era achieved notoriety in net. Here's a six-pack that have been stars in various stages of the last 4 decades. All carried their teams to various championships. Rarely has a player been recognized for a piece of equipment, but Jerry Cheevers and his mask have become an inseparable part of our memories. Cheevers began maskless in Toronto, but later in the 60s he moved to Boston and backstopped the Bruins to a pair of Stanley Cup championships. Always confident, Cheevers was an individual no Bruin fan will ever forget. He made a dramatic entrance to NHL stardom. Patrick Roy's baptism by fire was during the 1986 playoffs. In 20 games, he recorded a 1.92 average and was awarded the Conn Smythe Trophy. Since then, he's established himself solidly. 2 Vezina trophies, 2 first-team All-Star selections, and a multiple of ovations at the Forum. Few goalies in the modern era have entered the NHL in such successful fashion as did Tony Esposito.
La première étoile, the first star, Tony Esposito.
In 1969, Tony O recorded 15 shutouts, posted a 2.17 average, and won both the Calder and Vezina trophies. He and brother Phil were celebrated siblings. Tony's career included 3 Vezinas and 5 All-Star selections. Rating Bernie Parent is an easy task.
I think he was the greatest goalie that ever lived, the greatest angle goalie. He didn't have to move more than an inch or 2 to save a puck. And it was unbelievable. He won the Most Valuable Player Award in the playoffs. He won a brand new car. And immediately after winning the car, he gave it to me.
That type of generosity did not extend to enemy shooters. The turning point in his career occurred in Toronto. Parent received tutelage from Jacques Plante. He returned to Philadelphia, and the Flyers won 2 cups. Perhaps no goaltender has been blessed with such athletic dexterity. Grant Fuhr's junior numbers made him a first-round selection of the Edmonton Oilers in 1981. Playing on championship teams that concentrated on offense, Fuhr's remarkable reflexes stood him in great stead. Ken Dryden's track record as a winner in a relatively short career is remarkable. His trademark pose was in vogue in 1971 as the Canadiens won a Stanley Cup and Dryden a Conn Smythe Trophy. In all, the 6'4" scholar recorded a 2.24 average in 7 seasons, 6 Stanley Cups, and a place as our all-star goaltender. Rarely has a professional sport seen innovation brought on by one individual. In 1966, Robert Gordon Orr joined the Boston Bruins and changed forever the face of hockey. Orr, brilliant in his own zone, terrorized opponents in the attacking zone. His all-around play in both ends of the arena is still the standard by which we judge the complete player. And his tremendous performances set the stage nicely as we look at the top defensemen of the modern era. 6 great defensemen, 6 great offensemen. When it comes to sheer acceleration and pure speed, Paul Coffey has few equals.
Here's Coffey on the right in, shoots, scores!
In 1986-87, Coffey recorded 48 goals as Edmonton's number 7. With the Oilers, 5 consecutive All-Star seasons and 2 Norris trophies. 2 years later, he was dealt to Pittsburgh. There, he recorded his 900th NHL point in his 10th season. Larry Robinson may have left Les Habitants, but it's with the Canadiens that he'll always be remembered. He joined Montreal in 1973. His long stride and gifted puck-handling skills enabled him and his team to achieve greatness. A 6-time All-Star, Robinson played a prominent role on hockey's most prominent franchise and enhanced its considerable reputation. All-around ability, durability, and dependability. Ray Bourque has had it all at both ends of the ice. few players play more quality minutes and provide more quality period. Number 77 combines the qualities of offense and defense to the delight of the Boston Garden faithful. For 17 seasons, Brad Park brought intelligence to the sport. A born leader, Park anchored a Memorial Cup team in Toronto, then moved on to New York, where he quarterbacked Rangers teams with innovation and anticipation. After a trade in 1975, Park's reputation was enhanced as he piloted the Bruins to a pair of Stanley Cup final berths. Brad Park was a thinking man's hockey player. Now on to our All-Stars. The Islanders' Denny Potvin is first up, just as he was on 7 All-Star teams in his 15-year NHL career. Potvin holds the NHL record of 310 goals and 1,052 points by a defenseman. He captained the Islanders to 4 Stanley Cups. He was abrasive and physically dominant. His shot was revered. His determination, legend. 12 fabulous seasons gave Bobby Orr a magical name in sport. As an Oshawa junior, he propelled Bruin hopes in the 1960s. When he arrived in Boston, the game simply changed. Bobby Orr, more than any other player in any game, altered the face of his sport. 6 knee operations were Bobby's biggest foe, yet he recorded these honors. 3 Hart trophies, 2 scoring titles, 8 Norris trophies, 2 Smythe trophies after 2 Stanley Cups. Records and memories to last a lifetime. Expansion ushered in new teams, new players, even a new league. It meant more money, more fans, and a lot more goals. Bobby Hull's record of 51 set in 1966 fell by the wayside, Wayne Gretzky scoring 92 on one occasion in a season, and the magic century point plateau became the magic 200-point plateau as 99 got all the way to 215 points. Point is, the players making headlines in this era up front were the ones garnering celebrity by scoring goals. At one time or another, in one phase or another, each of these gentlemen were dominant figures for their clubs. Bill Barber was Bobby Clark's left-hand man in Philadelphia, and his contributions were vital. Evidence of that came early. Whether a Kitchener junior or a Flyer rookie, Barber showed evidence of stardom. He followed up with 420 career goals, adding 108 points when it counted most in the playoffs. Once called the most technically perfect player in the world, Bob Gainey used every one of his assets to best advantage in establishing himself as an all-around success. Never a goal scorer, Gainey tenaciously led the Canadiens and put his name on the Stanley Cup 5 times. The final won as team captain in 1986. Shortly after expansion, Frank Mahovlich changed uniforms. His move from Toronto to Detroit and then on to Montreal with brother Pete did not indicate an erosion of his skills. In fact, he had his best season in 1969-70 and played a large role in 2 Montreal Stanley Cup teams in the 1970s. The Flying Frenchman is a tag that befits both the Montreal Canadiens and certainly Yvon Cournoyer. For 15 seasons, the Roadrunner caught defenses napping, playing both wings and potting 428 career goals.
Cournoyer to the third. He rips the Sawchuk wide. A boost in front of the net. Cournoyer goal!
For 23 seasons, Johnny Busick put up Hall of Fame offensive totals. The stocky winger from Edmonton began his career in Detroit before moving to Boston and the Uke line in 1957. He remained in Beantown for the next 21 years. His gentlemanly play saw him capture 2 Lady Byng trophies. His nose for the net saw him score 566 career goals. Bobby Hull makes his second appearance on our all-star list as the top left wing. His popularity grew following expansion. In fact, the Golden Jet soon was a Jet as he jumped to the rival WHA in Winnipeg. There he combined with Ulf Nilsson and Anders Hedberg on a line regarded as the best of its time. He returned to the NHL with Hartford in 1980, ending his career with 913 goals, 610 of those coming in the NHL, where he was a 12-time All-Star and a figure of classic renown. We move now to the starboard side. This group certainly have the right stuff. His nickname was Nifty. Rick Middleton received that moniker with good reason. Few players at any time had the magical ability to make the puck do the tricks that Middleton could. He didn't just score goals, he scored memorable ones. Cat-like and elusive, the Bruins' number 16 notched 448 goals in a 14-year NHL career. It's no exaggeration to state that there were many in the unforgettable category. Speaking of unforgettable, post-expansion featured Gordie Howe and the continuance of his marvelous legend. His 700th and 800th career goals occurred following 1967. He retired in 1971, but then returned to play 7 more years in the WHA with sons Mark and Marty. When Hartford joined the NHL, Howe played his final NHL season in 1980 at the age of 51. A complete player with a rocket shot, Lanny McDonald's hard-driving persona first took shape in Toronto. His popularity was unquestioned there, and it later grew as he moved back home to Alberta. There he captained the Flames to their first Stanley Cup.
Up at center and coming in is Loeb. Newendijk centered it. McDonald scores! Lanny McDonald!
McDonald's always been emotional, his career and that cup meaning so much.
Anything beyond that, you know, those are bonuses that can't be weighed, and whether it be a blue 7 or a red 9, red and white 9, I guess, you know, I can't quit smiling.
Mr. 50. Mike Bossy has been called hockey's most potent scoring machine. 573 goals in only 10 seasons. No player has ever been so productive. Goals were automatic. So was the respect he so richly deserved.
Trying to send a Bossy in front, but that was cleared. Right to Trottier to Bossy. Shoots. He scores! Mike Bossy has his 50th goal!
To have accomplished what I've accomplished and maybe not be recognized for it on an all-around basis is probably something that might bother me, but I think if I have the self-satisfaction of having achieved what I wanted to achieve, then that'll be enough for me.
Yari Curry joined the Edmonton Oilers in 1980. He and Wayne Gretzky were an immediate hit. Their combination was illustrious, hockey's Rogers and Hammerstein. A 5-time All-Star, his 474 goals include 4 seasons above the magic 50 mark. In postseason, he's deadly. 92 goals in the playoffs are trademarks of his success. Few players have ever come to the NHL so highly heralded as Guy Damien Lafleur. A junior star with Quebec, the Canadiens drafted Lafleur in 1971, expecting him to be the next Morenz, Belleville, or Richard. He fulfilled that promise with 6 50-goal seasons. Flamboyant and compelling, he notched 3 scoring titles, was a true folk hero. He retired in 1984, but returned to the NHL in 1988 with the New York Rangers and made a triumphant return to the Forum. His superb career is worthy of a place on our all-star team.
Miller is centering. Pass. Here's the first.
Post-expansion hockey's been blessed with centers that for various reasons have been responsible for the stability of their franchises. These 6 should be very proud of their accomplishments. Numero 66. Mario Lemieux is the youngest of our group. Like Lafleur and Belleville before him, Lemieux's life has been the subject of close scrutiny. Expectations have been high, but he's delivered.
Lemieux with it again, and just 5 seconds left. Well stepped by Samuelson. What a move! What a move! Man, oh man!
Twice he's been the scoring champion. His gifts are awe-inspiring. Mario is magnificent. Gilbert Perreault's style was such that many times opponents were helpless to do much about their predicament. He forged a junior legend in Montreal. Buffalo took note and made him their cornerstone, and his stock quickly rose, and so did that of the Sabres. Perreault potted 512 goals in a 17-year span. His shifty, slick style was honored in 1990 as he was inducted into hockey's Hall of Fame. Character. Bobby Clark's not an example, He's the definition of that word.
Bobby Clark is the greatest competitor I've ever seen in any professional sport. He was the greatest leader I've ever seen in any professional sport. He was actually a dream dressed in work clothes. I still remember the practices where sometimes I wanted the players to take it easy. He still pretended it was a game.
Those spectacular accolades were constantly lauded upon hockey's ultimate leader. Never the most talented, always the most tormenting. His consistent work ethic and tenacious style led his Philadelphia Flyers to a pair of Stanley Cups. Clark's determination, despite suffering from diabetes, was inspiring. Marcel Dionne ended his potent career with 731 goals and 1,771 points. Those totals are highly impressive, and Dionne produced wherever he went. His years as a Los Angeles King were highlighted by his membership on the Triple Crown line alongside Charlie Simmer and Dave Taylor. Late in his career, Marcel Dionne moved on to New York. There, he notched his 700th goal. No player in history is more associated with goal scoring than was Phil Esposito, a center who held court in the slot for most of his 18 seasons. A 1967 trade saw Espo depart Chicago and join Boston, and it changed the fortunes of the Bruins and the NHL record book. Espo became the first 100-point man in NHL history. He recorded 717 goals in his career, 76 in one season. In the 80s, the Bruins honored him by retiring his famous number 7 with help from Ray Bourque. What's to say about 99 that hasn't been said before? It should come as no surprise that the great one is our choice as hockey's top center in the modern era. Here's an athlete that's been called the greatest in the history of team sports. His durability, his creativity, his productivity, his ability to control the pace of any game anytime he wants is truly unbelievable. He's hockey's all-time points leader, its all-time assist leader. He's captained 4 Stanley Cups, won 9 Hart trophies, topped the 200-point mark 4 times. He's made greatness look easy. The one thing that stands out most about Wayne Gretzky is his class. On the ice and off, he's been the ultimate hockey's had to offer.
Comes out into the neutral zone. Gretzky got it! That's it!
99 leads the way on our last group of stars. A pretty impressive cast. When recapping, you'll see some familiar names as we take one last look at our choices in the 3 segments. With so many standout players throughout the NHL's history, it's easy to debate or, in fact, argue our choices as all-time all-stars, but then that's half the fun. One thing is certain, in examining the exploits of the 74 players featured in our presentation, one fact is not debatable, and that's hockey's good fortune. I'm Ron McLean. For more information or to order any of the following cassettes from Molson's Hockey Classic Series, write to Molson Home Video, 250 Bloor Street East, Suite 805, Toronto, Ontario.